have any questions, please feel free to let me know. Yeah, we're here to enjoy ourselves, have a good time, and do some oil painting. So yeah, if you guys don't have any reference for what we're doing with oil painting, please ask questions and we're gonna go from there. But let's have a little look about what we're gonna be doing. We are gonna be painting this. I put it out on Instagram to see what's what, and this was one of the ones that won. So yeah, just before we begin, I have a 8-week online oil painting class that I'm very excited about. And it's starting on Sunday, and I hope you guys can make it because it's gonna be a lot of fun. We're starting from the ground up, from the basics, really focusing in on what it looks like to paint with oils, what it feels like, very tangible, medium-based ideas that we're gonna be working on. And the goal is to get you to a point where you know how to do what it is that you want to do with oils, right? And it might be a big journey, a big long one, but to know what the medium is going to do and to know how to get what you want, that is freedom. That is key, and that's really cool. So yeah, I hope you guys can join us. There's a link in the description down below. But this is what we're going to be painting. My goal with this is we're kind of here for about an hour. I'm going to be trying to work on this in a way that we can basically be done in that hour, which means that we're going to have to be really, really focused on the things that are important and really, you know, not worrying about things that aren't. So my first goal with this, as we're working through it, is going to be to try and get a sense of form, which is nice because we actually have a pretty clear sense of form with the reference here. Our values, which is kind of our light and dark quality, they're pretty strong with this one. Yeah, so we've got a wash here just to begin with, which is a mixture between Prussian blue and transparent red oxide, and just really thin. The really neat thing about painting with oils is that you can really change your experience with it by changing how thinly or thickly we're painting. I actually have to get the reference up here so I can see it too. And so we kind of have this idea that we can really, if I start with some really thin layers, just to get the idea, get the ball rolling, when I come back to paint over, it's, yeah, when I come back to paint over, it's really easy just to lay something down. Let's see, Leslie says, are you thinning with solvent or these water-soluble oils? I am thinning at the moment because I'm inside in a very unventilated area with something called lavender spike oil. It takes the place of Gamsol and takes the place of things like turpentine. Gamsol is actually, it's pretty all right for you, but lavender spike oil is that next level. But yeah, so I'm thinning it out, and we are just kind of like building up a sense of what's going on, of what we want. Let's see. Yeah, I cropped this in from that photo that we're working from. And because this whole thing is like full of gray, I want to try and see if I can get pops of color just to come in and stand out. Because as we go, I'm sure it's going to get sort of, in a way, less and less colorful. So I want to start, in a way, with a little extra color in here, even when I'm doing this really dark stuff. So yeah, if we can use the thin paints to really get a good sense of what is going on in the painting, then we can come back in with some nice, thicker, more opaque paint. Yeah, okay, so now we have beautiful areas. And it's really interesting to me, at least, to see that we can do so much kind of communication with just these basic values. And whenever I'm looking for reference, I kind of try to look at it on a number of levels, where I want reference that's like thematically interesting to me. But also, I really want to like a clear value statement. Because the minute that you get that clear, that sort of clarity in the value statement, the rest of your painting can be much more loose. And it ends up being pretty hard to kind of fudge that. So, yeah. All right, cool. So there's kind of our basics for what is happening, right? The next thing that I think is pretty important is you can see there's this, where's my hands? Where's the photo? Right down there. There's this gradient at the bottom of that light coming in. And so I think, you know, as far as the lighting effect, that's really like the strongest lighting effect we have. And for that to work, I think I'm going to need to push some of this stuff up here even more. Danae says, am I crazy or does it already look cool? I don't think you're crazy. If that's any help. Here we go. And we're going to push that down. And then let's see. Let's get this one further down. And then this one too. Okay, so we kind of have structurally what's going on. I really want to put in some of my darkest darks and my lightest lights. And to do that, I think some of my darkest darks are going to be up in this corner here. It's almost like there's this really obvious gradient down here going from sort of light to a little bit darker. And it's almost as if it continues upwards into this sort of really dark area. So I'm kind of going to push that, at least get that hint in there. And in a way that's going to help me to get just a sense of how far things are going. It's kind of like putting a limiter so that we know where we're going to and from and in between. Laszlo says, how has being a gouache painter influenced your oil painting workflow? Looks like a similar initial base layer. Yeah, so actually very much so. I think when I first started oil painting, I didn't have a good sense of how much you can achieve by changing the viscosity of the paint. And gouache really forces you to do that, or at least it forced me to do that. And so coming back to oil painting and very much enjoying it, I can take those ideas of how amazing that kind of fluidity and viscosity can really be in helping to make a painting, and pull that in to what we're doing here. Okay, I want to try and get the light. I had initially thought that I was going to really save these highlights in here for later, but I think I need to do them. So I'm going to get a brush, a lighter brush, and let's check it out. But yeah, working on my flow and my viscosity has really just made it so that I can do what I want with the paint, whereas before I felt very limited. But I suppose once you start to really dig into that, then you get a really, there's a lot of freedom. So that's something we're definitely starting off with and talking about in our oil painting class. Okay, so there's kind of some there's some different colors that we're going to try to achieve inside of here, but I'm not ready for that yet because it's going to be nice. It's going to be really cool, but it's not actually quite as important for the statement of the piece. So it's something I think I can come in a little bit later with that. And it'll probably end up being a similar, maybe a touch darker value than the base here, but pretty similar. So yeah, we're going to go with that. All right. So here's the next one. There's a really nice reflection. Isn't it a green reflection up there? It's beautiful. And so I want to try and get in there and see if we can get that. And the question is, do I do that now? Or do I wait until I have a little bit more context built up? And the wisdom in me says wait till the context is built up more, but apparently I'm just going for it. So with these kind of like reflected lights, it's always tempting to make them a lot lighter than they really are. And so whenever I start mixing them up, I'm always very careful to try and not go any lighter than I think it might actually be. All right. Yeah, and this down here actually ends up being so textured. So I'm going to come in just with something like that, and we'll get some darker values a little bit later on. So I want to, yeah, I'm seeing, now that we start to like pull some of the values in, it becomes really obvious really quick that we need, we'll need to be doing a bunch of sort of just working around that. It's always interesting. The tighter your values are, the tighter your ability to see how much tighter you need your values to be. It can, if you're not ready for it, it could probably be a bit disheartening. Yeah, I'll tighten these up later. Let's see. So I think that's sort of my general color temperature scheme is going to be, I want to push kind of the blue quality of this. Have this kind of be a north-facing blue light. We don't actually get direct sunlight from here. And so it's going to be predominantly cool and blue. And I think that's going to be really neat in this painting if we can pull in sort of some really good warmth in the counterforms. That's the forms that are acting as the shadow to the light. Yeah, that's pretty nice. Okay. Here we want to to be doing something similar over this side. And I'm trying to, because it's architecture and it's like really tempting to try and get everything like perfectly straight. I'm actually trying to be intentionally quite loose with this, because if I do accidentally make everything perfectly straight, then every single mistake that I make is gonna sing out like crazy, and that's actually not gonna be helpful. And so kind of so conversely, we want to try and keep things loose for now so we can really focus in on the things we want to feel sturdy and secure and very safe, straight. Yeah, so we want to get this gradient going, and I want to make sure that I'm actually like providing it with really good context for where I begin and where I end in terms of the values. Let's see. And so yeah, I'm kind of, I want to tighten everything up around it. All right, so let's see. This is where we want to start pushing these blues, because this is not quite direct. Take a drink every time he says values. Yes. So there's a whole bunch of kind of shadows in here. I'm going to avoid the really obvious ones as we sort of build the texture up. But for now, and kind of for the sake of, we want to not slow ourselves down. We really have to get this done in this hour. And that is, I like that. I love that challenge. Lysel says, is the oil painting paper on or a canvas sheet? I've tried canvas sheets and wondering if the paper dries faster. This is, I'm going to see if I can find it here. I know I have it here somewhere. I might have it here, but it's not, oh, here it is. This is Canson's Oil and Acrylic. It is relatively cheap. It's archival. It is, it feels great. You know, if you're able to sort of learn on this stuff, then transferring to everything else is pretty easy. And I like to use it so that I don't end up kind of being precious about it. You know, if I have a whole stretched canvas, I can get really precious. And it makes me a little more hesitant to paint. And I absolutely don't need to be more hesitant to paint. That's not a thing I want for myself. And so especially when you're kind of in a learning phase, getting something that is nice and cheap and easy is definitely something I'd recommend. Okay, so we have kind of an overall feeling of this. Where did my paper towel go? Okay, and so this is where like we said before, once you start to get your values close, you realize how much closer they need to be in order for it all sort of to make sense. Let's see, do you think you could frame that in a normal frame for photos just without glass as opposed to more expensive frames or canvas? You certainly could. Certainly could. And Lysel says, I've tried canvas sheets and wondering if the paper dries faster. Arches has a paper that is an oil paper, and it is certainly a lot more absorbent, and what you do will dry faster, really just because it's getting absorbed. And so I think this stuff's a little bit intentionally less absorbent, and I personally like that myself. I think that's really, I like things being workable for longer. Yeah, so we're kind of pulling in some occlusion shadows. If this might be a good chance to sort of make amends, fix anything up in the drawing that I need to fix up before we go in with some heavier paint. Here on the side. Yeah. All right, we're getting things going. We need to tighten up the values down here. I think I could probably start putting in some heavier paint right now. So we have our like kind of basic block in done. And then basically everything from now on in, we want to start almost kind of approaching the end of the painting. Some people do that from the very beginning. Those people are crazy. No, I just find it's very helpful for me to give myself a very distinct sort of part of the painting process where I can make some huge mistakes and it really doesn't matter. And so that's really nice. Danae says, hey. I don't know why Danae's saying hey. Felt called out. I wasn't talking about you. I was not talking about you, I promise. No, I was actually talking about Richard Schmidt, our beloved master, Richard Schmidt. Always talks about finishing the painting from the very, very beginning. And I always felt like that was really ultimately some very unhelpful advice. It's kind of a late stage game, that one. Okay. Yeah. So we are starting to pull things in. And at this point, I'm going to pull in my colors here. I know in the reference, they're pretty strong greens. Yeah. And I know that in real life, you know, this photo is, these are like these really vibrant greens. But this is one of the things where in real life, we have a greater capacity to see values than a camera does. Our ability to we can see much more values than a camera does at any one given point in time. That's why you know, we can look around and see a whole bunch of details. You pull out a camera and it starts like overexposing itself really quickly. And so something like this, there actually is quite a bit of leniency in terms of coming in and playing around with the values of what you're seeing in between what is essentially in the shade and what's in the light. In person, you would see much more values of like this, and it wouldn't be quite so blown out. And so the question is, you know, what do we want to do? It's actually a little bit helpful to have this to be in like a very different value range. But even the color intensity of this stuff, yeah, you could get away with that kind of higher color contrast. Got these little blues at the top too. Oh yeah, let's get in these bushes. Does anyone have any questions about oil painting or painting in general, painting process? Where are you guys at? Let's see, do I ever pre-mix a color before I start? That is a good question. Sometimes I actually do. Sorry. And the times that I do are times where, especially plein air painting, because when you go plein air painting, it's just crazy chaos. And sometimes you're in a situation where you're like, you know, the light is not going to stick around for long. And I mean, all paintings outside, that's how it's going to go. That light's not sticking around for long. And so if you're intimidated by something, by the lighting, by anything, you can kind of pause before you even begin and do your drawing of what you want so that your drawing is down. Mix your paints with the color, or at least like create these little patches of colors that you're seeing, and then you kind of then have the ability to stop and then pick up the paint and put it down really quickly because you've pre-mixed the things. And so if you're ever in a situation where the lighting is changing really quick, that's my recommendation. I don't actually have to do it very often. Like normally, you keep up to some degree. But if you're talking about a sunset or sunrise or one of those forest situations where the light is just like moving around the floor the whole time and you want to get in and get it right, then there's definitely space for that. Yeah, okay. Actually, this should really just be coming down here. Lysel says, I've only tried water mixable oils and I loved it. Been afraid of painting with solvents and the cleanup. That's why I love gouache. Yeah, so you can really do the whole thing with the lavender spike oil, and it's non-toxic and it smells absolutely amazing. So I'd love that. Let's see, what was I gonna get? I don't know. Bree says, I'm also afraid of solvents. I just tried my first couple oil painting sessions and tried the lavender sparkle, just when it's a very strong fragrance. It is very strong. It is. Yeah, there's this nice green in here. Big and beautiful. There it is. And it's up here. I'm going to make this a bit more intense and get even some lower value than that. Skywelly says, oh, hi, Skywelly. Been a while. Says, Sennelier sells cool, eco-friendly paint solvents and brush cleaner for oil paint. More expensive than turpentine, but worth it, I'd say. Yeah, I definitely just, stay away from pure turpentine. Unless you're outside. That's for sure. But yeah, I should look into that. Danae says, have you ever used Terpenoid Natural? It's a grapefruit-based solvent that says non-toxic. That's neat. I haven't. Do you have it? Could try it out. There's so much dirty texture in all of this right here. I want to try and almost build up the values to some degree with this texture. In a lot of my teaching in my courses, we took a lot about control. And I suppose in a way this is kind of like chaotic control. But this is, yeah, like, so long as we can create the form to begin with and really get that form communicating well enough, then you can come back in with the texture. And then it's the difficult thing is to try and do both at once. And we're doing a little bit of that. And that ends up being a bit chaotic, but amazingly fun. So long as you know that, like, you know how to fix it, right? You know how to come back in, and that right now, if we come into a problem of like overemphasizing something here, it's coming back in and looking at that form is always going to be our solution. And Danae says, I bought some, haven't received it yet. Well, I mean, if it's truly non-toxic and it does the job, then that's probably just great as is. Okay, so yeah, what I really like about this is this gradient down below. And I think we're almost ready to go and give that another shot. What I'm gonna do, because our sense of the values is always kind of when we have these little gaps in between, that can often cut into our sense of what the value there actually is. And so this point, right before we're about to get really kind of clear about what this gradient is doing, I want to go in and cut some of that accidental change of values down. Yeah. This is satisfying. This is really satisfying to paint. You guys done much architectural stuff? I think in a way, there's something easier than most architectural work about this. Probably because we're at a slight angle and there's a whole bunch of like turns and curves and stuff like this. So no one spot is really going to be in a way parallel to another because of the angle that the camera's on. And so that gives us just like that a little bit more leniency in it all. Nice. Yeah, we gotta pull this down a bit. Lysel says, it's nice to see your style still recognizable with a different medium. Oh, thanks. yeah, I think there's something about that where you can really pull style from a medium, but I think most of the time style happens um, independent of a medium. Obviously, like we were saying before, like you were putting up before, uh, a lot of what I'm doing with the oil has been helped and informed by my gouache practice. But, oh, that's nice. Sorry, getting distracted. Talking and painting. Whoever thought it would have been so difficult? But yeah, so I've brought things from gouache that are really helpful. But I do think style ends up being independent unless you are really, if you pick up oils and then just try to be like Sargent every time you pick up oils, but do something entirely different every time you're with watercolor, that's when it gets a little like less recognizable, a little bit more difficult that way. But since I'm not trying to be anything, that's when I can actually be myself. Danae says, I'm terrified to try my style in oil since I've been working digitally. Any chance you'd have tips for making the transition? Um, Specifically for making the transition, I don't know if I can think quite that much while I'm painting. I mean, getting an understanding of color coming from pigments rather than color picking or matching your HSVs that way. But I know you're already on that. You got that. And then it really comes down to making sure you're honoring what the medium requires of you. Like if I just put in a whole bunch of really thick paints immediately, then I couldn't do things over the top of them. I couldn't adjust and make it and work into it that way. And even with oils, I normally actually start a bit thicker than this, but this piece, it's so textural. There's so much texture that is kind of in here that giving like a little extra transparency to at least this portion of the process actually ends up being helpful for communicating inside of that. Let's see, Bree says, this is probably a pre-question for the class Discord, but will there be info on taking good photos of oils for submitting assignments not used to reflective media? Camera loving just, oh, sorry. Oh, there it is. Justin's shoulder. Yeah, we can definitely talk about that. We are now. We're going to talk about that now. All right, I'm going to come in. We are going to, in fact, start working through this gradient down here. It is significantly more difficult to take photos of oil than it is of gouache or watercolor. Just much more reflective. What I've learned, and that should have been really obvious to me from the beginning, is that you definitely shouldn't varnish your paints or until obviously you do it at the 6-month mark. You can either do it at the 6-month mark, or you can do it pretty much immediately. In between is what's really going to hurt things. But yeah, you don't want to varnish before you take a photo, because that's always going to suck. All right, so we have this stuff down here. I had it all drawn out, but obviously I've painted over it. sit down. I always love this kind of an ultramarine uh, versus but umber, or right now we're actually just using a desaturated transparent red oxide. They get this really beautiful feeling as you sort of work between these colors. Every time I love it. But yeah, we can get these shapes in and then start working that gradient around it. Otherwise, I might sort of end up putting like a little bit too much thick paint down, and then getting these transparent areas is going to be a lot more difficult. Sweet. Let's see, how long have we been painting for? Oh, quite a while. Longer than I was anticipating. All right, let's start to get some thicker paints in here. Lysol says, are these thin down base layers sticky when you try to add thicker layers on top? No, they're not. They're not. That's kind of the neat part about it. Like I said, I've normally moved on from working this thin by now. But now we're going to start working into, like, you can't see what's underneath this paint that we're working with right now. So it's opaque. And so now we can start to add some really nice, the paint's all going to work together with itself really nicely, because it actually has a certain degree of thickness to it. Leslie says, that's good. Stickiness is the one reason I don't like acrylics. It's happened with the water-soluble oils as well. They're not as bad as acrylics. Yeah. I mean, these paints will eventually get sticky. Well, actually, no, not this thin. When they are thicker than this, they will get sticky as they're part of their drying process. Danae says, you paint so lightly, the paint isn't even close to ferrule. I'm going to have to learn that skill. Ghosts of brushes haunt my studio. Right down here, you like paint all the way to the end. Yeah, I normally use, I don't know how much of it I normally use. Oh yeah, let's get these shadows. Let's get these shadows in feeling nice. So there's just like this little transition. You smush it in violently. If you have, I've found that, like, if I don't quite have enough paint, I will paint like that, really sort of heavy-handed. But as I've learnt, in a way that the thickness of the paint and what's going on like that, yeah, I can get to a point where I know how much paint I have on and what's going to come off, and then I don't have to worry quite so much about being really heavy-handed. All right, let's get rid of these little white guys down here. Okay, so I want my gradient to be a little bit heavier than this. And by heavier, I just really mean slightly light, probably lighter at the front, a little bit darker at the back. And so let's push that. And this gradient really is really what has gotten me to wanting to paint this particular painting. And so I really want to get it right. Let's see, Danae says, that's why I use a palette knife for mixes. I asked Justin if he ever did it, and he said no. I guess I see he doesn't need to. Yeah, I always feel really awkward with a palette knife. I don't know why. And then it just starts to annoy me. There's nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong with it. Just not my cup of tea. Lysel says, for me, I'm too lazy to use a palette knife. I'm going to pretend that that's not also my reason. But that may very well be also my reason. I don't want to like get out of the flow. And I feel like, you know, putting one tool down and picking up another might really do that. Steve's here. This is teaching me a lot. I have a background in acrylics and gouache, and I've been using water-soluble oils for a little while now. Thanks for doing this. Will this stream stay on your channel? Yes, it will. Caitlin's here as well. I find mixing with a palette knife oddly satisfying. Brilliant. Yeah, ever since Danae asked me if I mix with a palette knife, I've been wanting to give it a bit more of a sort of a concerted try. And I was going to today, but the place that I am ended up not having internet about like 45 minutes ago. And I was gonna maybe prepare and mix some stuff up beforehand, but nope, I had to go fix internet. Every time it doesn't lose internet unless like I really need it. All right. Oh, lots of talk. I find mixing, yeah, Danae says, but they're easier to clean, just wipe off. It's true. Lassa says, okay, I use that losing flow instead from now on. I seem to have misplaced my palette knife, but I'll find another one, try it soon. Okay, so I know I had wanted to maybe do a little, a bit of pushing darker into some of these areas as well. I have a feeling maybe I tried to define some of these rocks and everything a little bit too early. Then maybe it would have been a better strategy to create the gradient exactly like I wanted and then pull in these rocks. But, oh well. I always end up thinking that by the time I finish a painting, I know exactly how I want to begin it. So yeah, let's see. This is where if I was just by myself, I'd sort of step away for a minute and give myself a fresh start to figure things out. Caitlin says, do you have any recommendations for a travel palette for oil? I've been traveling for 2 weeks. I will be traveling for 2 weeks of the course, but I can only bring my table easel and other supplies. But I don't want to cut around my glass palette. Yeah, I understand not wanting to pull around a glass palette. I wouldn't want that either. I would suggest, let's see, what do I use? I use, well, apparently I don't have it with me. Oh yeah, here it is. I use this, which you can see on my Instagram. I've got a couple of reels about it, but it's pretty easy. And this seems like it might be a problem to sort of clean up, but it doesn't take me more than 3 minutes to clean. And so it just ends up not actually being much of a problem. Yeah, okay, let's, yeah, but otherwise, I don't know. You can use the like paper ones, little like throwaway paper palettes. Those are really handy. Oh, let's see. Oh, Tagnan says, can I throw a gouache question your way? Absolutely, you can. Every time. What's that? What is it? Let's see, get this going up. I always find myself getting to a certain point in a painting. You pull everything together and then realize that there's space to like refine the values. And then you get that level together and then there's space to refine the values. It's like this endless cycle. And so like the tighter it is, the more tight you see it needs to be. There we go, nice. Must be a big question. I'm excited to see what it is. Yeah, there's this little space down here where we're getting some kind of edge light coming through. Here it is. It's your technique that gives that fantastical fuzzy feeling to your gouache paintings. For example, I've seen in your paintings where the tree is above red water. The tree above red water. That one, I think, if I'm thinking of the right one, if you and I are talking about the same painting, then that one is actually open acrylics. That one is open acrylics. But yeah, there's something really interesting that I think not everyone thinks about or cares about. But interestingly, only 1% of our vision, of our total field of vision, is in focus. Isn't that 1 to 2%? So if you grab your hand out and put it out like this, put your thumb up, your thumbnail, that's what's in focus to you at any given point in time, that area. And it gets really interesting because cameras don't do that. Cameras, they'll focus on an entire plane. And so as we're painting, I always think about these little areas that we want to be focusing in on. And to some degree, to focus on one area means to kind of lose focus in other areas. And as I experience it in paintings, that helps me to feel it, like it feels natural, because that's the way that I see things. And I, not just to have one spot in your painting that's focused and everything else not, but in a way to have a sequence of spots. And so there's things in focus, and then there's lost edges. And um, I think it's almost a focus on that you might be experiencing as you're looking at the painting. Um, I don't know. I'm not used, so I don't know how true that is. But yeah, it's a good question. It's a good question. In my gouache paintings, yeah, I definitely go from wet and loose, and tighten things in from there, and trying to keep as much wet and loose as I possibly can, um, to facilitate that. All right. As I'm tightening up, I keep saying this a million times over, but I keep thinking it. As I'm tightening up these areas on the outside, it makes me realize how much I need to tighten up in other areas. Not tighten up as in like um, get really detailed, just the values of tightening up. Yeah. It's funny, this could almost be a gouache painting as it currently stands. All right, there's some really interesting reflected light like coming off this wall, and so there's a little bit of a gradient going that way. I want to try and get that. Um, yeah, so Maz was saying in your course description, there's one week titled Alla Prima, and the other one titled Wet and Wet. What's the difference there? That's a good question. I've been asked that before. But what we're talking about in Alla Prima is, it's almost like a whole methodology of this is what we're going for, and these are not the correct steps, because I don't really believe in correct steps, but um, this is kind of like what people are commonly focusing on at different given points in time. And so there's kind of an unofficial repertoire of how Alla Prima paintings are done in a successful way. And so that's really what that's talking about. Um, I understand very well that's a confusing distinction. When we're talking about wet and wet, I think maybe the little things. Sorry, painting and thinking and talking at the same time. Um, yeah, when we're talking about wet and wet in that later on, is much more about like getting a lot of paint on your picture and working while everything is there and everything is very wet, and that can often be a very disorienting or troubling, or it's much more difficult to get detail, to get things to feel the way you want. But also, there's some really good positives about having some really heavy, really thick paint in there while everything is wet. And so, and you can see right now, like in this process of going very thin and moving up, it's very easy to add on top, very easy to add detail. And so the wet and wet week that we're talking about in there is much more, how do we then work when when the paint is really wet and kind of a bit heavy. Tagnan says, is the feeling different when painting with gouache or oil paints? Yeah, absolutely. When I'm painting with gouache, I panic. Painting with gouache is for crazy people, and I love it. Um, but yeah, there's so much timing that you have to get behind a gouache painting in order to get a very kind of fluid feel to it. That just doesn't exist with oil paintings. Oil painting, there's it's far more placid. You can get in and just kind of take your time with what you want. The concerns are more a little bit about how thick is the paint and how did I put it down, um, and then what does that mean? What can I do with that paint then at that thickness? Like that's the concern with gouache. It's like, oh my goodness, I need to do everything and I need to do it all at once. But I'm not sure that's exactly what you were asking. There is a feel to it. There is a different feel to it. I'm not sure I can explicitly tell you exactly what that different feel is. Let's see. Lysel says, when adding details, do you find it easier to paint light over dark um, versus dark details over light areas? Um, if things are wet and if things are wet and the paint is heavy, then it tends to be easy to paint um, dark over light, um, or rather light over dark. The thing is that all of these paints are to some degree transparent, but you add white to the whole thing, and it just changes the nature of it entirely. And so, if I stop putting, um, so for example, this transparent red oxide over the top of this white, it's going to mix together really strongly, and it's never going to quite be the same as just adding the transparent red oxide over paper. But I can kind of flip that, where I can put the transparent red oxide down and then put the white on, and the white will pick up some of that transparent red oxide, but it's going to be really, I don't know. The big difference really is just that your white will taint everything, and that's not a bad thing necessarily, but it'll happen. Cool. There's a little bit of like, I want to play around with these values up here right now. Caitlin says, the first time I tried oils after using gouache for a while, and my values didn't change, it blew my mind. That is, it makes me so happy. It makes me so happy. I love gouache, and I always will love gouache. But man, if my gouache values didn't change, I wouldn't be playing around with everything else. That is true. Okay, so here's what I want to do now. We can't paint forever, unfortunately. And so I'm going to start to add in some of these like little details. We'll see if we can kind of work towards finishing. Finishing not meaning that it's perfect, or even that it's where I would finish if it was just kind of just me, myself. But just in terms of one, tightening things up, like I'm gonna do a little pass right now where anything that really strikes me as being wrong. For example, the difference between the top of these two. Okay, and then we've got some like texture on the side over here, which this is where it's really difficult because you can look at this whole thing and kind of average it out, which is more or less what I've done. But the average is made up of some pretty big extremes, like some things that are significantly darker and some things that are significantly lighter. So I want to add them in without really messing things up. So cross your fingers for me. Okay, I've got this like little, yeah, let's get some thick paint. See, Lysel says you typically finish a painting in a day, or you sometimes take a bit longer. Um, with client work, I'll often take longer. But if it's my work for me, I'd say just a couple of sessions is what I'm after. If I could finish it in one, brilliant, I'll do that. But it'll often be a couple of sessions. One session that's kind of like this. I'll probably take it a bit further, but then also another session where everything's dry. And with this painting, like I said, I don't normally do it this thin. I could just go straight into that because it's so thin that I could put whatever I want over the top. But I don't know what it is. I don't quite have the reliability or emotional capacity at the moment to commit to like a painting that's going to take me forever. Let's get in some of these shadows. Do any of you have any other? There are a couple of questions about the oil painting class earlier on. Does anyone else have any questions about that? Yeah, up here. Maz says, do you still have feedback seats left? Yeah, I think we do have a couple of feedback seats left. Danae says, in the plein air section, will we learn how to carry canvases around? We will now. Sometimes I don't always know what people need to learn. I was thinking very much about technique when it comes to plein air painting. But 100%, let's talk about some of that more practical stuff. Man, adding these little details is so feels good. Kind of start to pull everything together. Let's see, Lysel says, so you're not going to paint like Ingress, Madame Moitasia? Taking 12 years to finish. Oh no, not me. Not me. Some part of me really wishes I had the time and the money, the capacity to just work on a paint. It's like a really romantic idea of working on a painting for a long time. And I like that romantic idea, but I've never quite been in a position to work, like where I could really commit to that. I've got this big, kind of furry textured brush here. Get some of this texture. Yeah. All right. Leslie says, I mean, it's a remarkable painting, but I'd lose after interest in a year. And he would not have liked Instagram. So true. I would love to get my art and my business, everything that I do, away from social media, just so that I didn't have that. I try not to make it a consideration, but it is also my living. If I could remove it from Instagram, from the need to be and perform and everything like that, oh man, that would be amazing. Think you might try galleries again someday? We'll have to see. Galleries are their own form of evil sometimes. The gallery, that's it's a social club. You can get into smaller galleries, but if you to try and get into a gallery that will sell, it will effectively sell paintings that would cost what they need to cost in order to sort of create them. That's where it's a very tight-knit community. Maybe one day we'll all move away from social media. I hope so. I mean, if you find joy in it, then find joy in it. Like that's, I don't think it's inherently bad, but oh, camera's focusing on me. Thank you for letting me know. I'm gonna try and get my habits in check. All right, my friends. Well, we're at the over an hour mark, so I think we're gonna stop there. If I were to continue, yeah, it would be really getting into the idea of getting some really nice thick paint and trying to get my edges. Once I get the overall statement and the big feeling of the entire thing, working through getting those edges so that I can really pull your attention where I want it and take it away from where I don't want it to be. But yeah, so that was a start, and it wasn't exactly how I always do it, but I think it was interesting, very interesting. So thank you guys. I do have this 8-week online painting class that I'm very excited about teaching as I get to sort of sit and explore oil painting again and again and again. That's really exciting. So thank you guys very much, and